Hi gang, in this video we are going to talk about several ways to use the RhythmBot web app in the practice room. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, there is a video called RhythmBot tutorial that you should look up that explains what the RhythmBot is and how it works. Basically, in the shortest possible version of the description, it generates random melodies according to parameters that you set, right? Triplets, straight time, mixed, loop, trades back and forth with you. It does a lot of different stuff. You can adjust, it's a snare drum you hear. It puts it in the context of a groove if you want. You can swing, you can half swing, you can adjust the tempo. You know, there's a lot of stuff you can adjust. You're going to see a lot of that stuff in this video as we go through some examples. But I'm not going to walk through all the different settings that you can adjust in this video because that happens in the tutorial. So that's where to look for what this is. But what I'm hoping that this tool does, and I'm hoping you see how this is possible in this video, is a few things. I think the three main goals here for the RhythmBot are, one, to expand your rhythmic vocabulary, right? So this is the store of rhythms, rhythmic melodies I call them, that are available to you to use just freely and easily in your improvisation. Right? Expand that because that's the real root of creative drumming, interesting melodies. Secondly, this will definitely improve your reading. And the third thing is, overall, I'm hoping that this makes you a more creative drummer. Because again, expanding that rhythmic vocabulary, being able to think of rhythms, right? Familiarize yourself with rhythms much more deeply, essentially become much more rhythmically literate. That is going to open up a lot of doors. And as you're going to see today, there's going to be a lot of ways that we apply these rhythms to the drum set, right? Whether you're a metal drummer, a jazz drummer, anything in between. There's ways to, right? It doesn't matter what style of drumming you're doing, it all comes from, or the source of all interesting drumming, of all drumming at all, is rhythmic melodies. So the better we get, the more adept we are at playing with those and moving them around and visualizing them, and at the end of the day, getting them in our bones so that they're instinctual, the better. So without further ado, let's talk about some ways to use the RhythmBot. The first way, the way that people might find the most boring but is probably the most important, is to think of this just as a flashcard app for you to interface with vocally, right? So again, all of your favorite drummers, you can imagine, it's actually impossible to imagine that they can't do this. All of your favorite drummers can beatbox, right? They can go da 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 ba da dum 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 ga 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 boom dum dum boom dum ba ba dum. So that is the indicator of the rhythmic vocabulary inside someone. If that is easy, bringing it to the drum set is a much easier task, right? In the inverse, if the melodies aren't in your head and you're playing patterns, you're essentially following patterns technically, and you're sort of like surprised at taking whatever melodies happen to be made by them. This is a dangerous move because you can end up playing the same melodies over and over again and get that feeling of like everything I play sounds the same. So the first thing you could do, and this is great because you can do this, pull up the app on your phone or when you're on the bus, in a plane, at the airport, wherever, and just pull up melodies, right? I've got a 2-bar melody here, and if I just pretend I'm sitting on the train here in New York just thinking about rhythms, and I'm just like, all right, well, let's just practice a little bit. Let me just get these deeper in my head. Here we go. Ready? Right. So I've got this on loop. I could be just like singing along with it quietly. 2, 3, 4. Right, I could do trade mode, so it does, it gives me a chance to do it, and then it shows me what the right answer is. We go back and forth, so I'm doing that. Well, here, let me pull up a new one. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Cat, 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 da 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 ba 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 da. Cat, da 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 ba da. All right, let's say, okay, this is going well. I want it to renew. I want it to refresh itself every time. I want it to be a new one every time. So here I'll go reading mode, and then I'll do the same thing, and it'll actually keep changing, right? So it'll infinite new rhythms, right? This is the ultimate reading experience. This is the ultimate way to get these rhythms in your head. So then it'll start the same. It'll play it. And then it'll give me a new rhythm. Okay, now I try this one. Ba da 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 da. New one. Da 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 da. Boom. Da 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 da. Right, I mean, if you did this even for 5 minutes a day, your intuition about rhythms it can't not expand, assuming that it's not already maxed out. Another thing you could do here, you could start assigning highs and lows vocally. So you're sort of imagining kicks and snares now. Dum gat, dum gat, dum gat, dum. Right, this is the first measure here. And you sort of start to improvise with highs and lows. Right, the richer that the representation of the drum set is in your mind, the easier it is going to be to take it from here and go to here. And that like symbiosis, if you will, if that's the right word, right? The sort of what your hands do and what's happening in your brain, ideally sort of becomes the same thing. It's not really that like this happens and then that happens. I think of a groove and then I play it. It's not really like that in real life. It's sort of happening at the same time, but both elements have to be at the same level, right? If you can think of all the melodies in the world, but you have absolutely no coordination and independence, it doesn't really matter because they can't come out. Conversely, if you've got a bunch of speed, you can play all your rudiments really well. This is most people's case, but there's no interesting melodies in your head. Your drumming will never become more interesting. You'll get faster and you'll play boring things more quickly, but that won't make it more interesting, right? So these are all some crazy ass rhythms here. And if these are too complicated, you could go down to the complexity. You could say, these are a little complicated. Let me go complexity to level 3 and work my way up here. So now, okay, I'm gonna not see such syncopated stuff, right? That might be too much. You could even go down, slow it down 10 BPM, and then you're like, okay, let's try this. Here we go. 2, 3, my turn. Cat, 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 cat. Boom. Tap, cat, tat, ba, ba, dum. Let me try and add some lows and highs to this next one. Doom, cat, 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 doom, do, do, cat, 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 doom. All right, so anyways, the first big way to use this app is to just get all of these little chunks of information, right? Because you see, there's only so many pieces of information, right? If I open up the custom thing under complexity, that's all the little like words that we're gonna use. And everything you play is made of these. And at the end of the day, you don't think in these little chunks, you think in longer phrases. But in the beginning, just like when we learn language, when you learn how language really works, like literacy, you start to learn letters, and you start to learn words, and you move things around. And that's a similar thing that's happening here. So anyways, first way to use this is vocally all the time, just getting these rhythms in your head. Another thing that gets overlooked a lot, right, interesting drumming. Like I keep saying, interesting melodies in your head, that's where creative drumming comes from. So, someone who's got a bunch of cool melodies in their head, they can use singles, right? Singles are often dismissed as like, boring. It's just da-da-da-da-ba-da-ba-da-boom, cool. But like accents and ghost notes with singles, that can be extremely interesting, right? If I go back to complexity 5, pull up a new rhythm, this melody, right, with singles, right, that's a pretty interesting rhythm, right? To be able to do singles and also make it interesting is a sign of a real pro, right? You're going, right? I'm not saying I'm a real pro, but it's at least more interesting than da-da-da-da-ba-ba-doo-ga-doom. So a second idea here would be to pull these up and make sure that your singles are as good as you think they are, or that you are as good at singles as you think you are, by pulling these up and making sure you can play all the melodies as accents over some ghost notes. So if we do that here, and remember, you don't always have to use the playback function. If you feel confident enough with your reading, you can just use this as examples, right? So if I pull this up, pull up another new one here. Ba ba ba, ga da, 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 da. This is actually going to be a really good one because a lot of times when people are thinking about accents and singles, they forget the several accents in a row kind of thing, right? 4 or 3 or 5 accents in a row. This has some built in here. So if I want to play this now, okay, I'm thinking I'm on the kit. 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and And already as I'm doing this, I'm starting to feel, in the beginning, you see the individual chunks. But very quickly, as you get familiar with this melody, you start to feel like they're bigger pieces. Like, for example, the note that falls into the bar line, right? Into 1 when it resets, the second bar is da-da-da, ba-ba-da, da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da. Right? The last note becomes a part of the first measure. Da-da-da-da, not da, rest, da-da-da. And even though the last little bit of this, ba-da-da, ba-ba-da, da-da-da-da, da-da, boom, right? That really all starts to feel like one piece of information. Da-da-da, ba-ba-da, da-da-da-da, da-ga-doom. Right? That's all one now. You're not thinking of like, okay, it's these 16th notes and then it's that. Anyways, this would be a good way to just do this. You could do, again, you could set up the click and the reading mode. Click will not play it back to you, like trading. Click will just pull up a bunch of melodies that keep replenishing themselves. It won't tell you if you're right or not. It'll just keep giving to you. So again, if you're feeling confident about your reading, you could do this and give yourself a real challenge here, and it'll just give you infinite rhythm. So if I try this here, I'll go 4 bars just for fun. It doesn't really matter. It's just easier to see. And you'll see it replenish itself as I try to play these. I actually forgot to push the reading button, which would make it actually replenish itself, but you get the idea. And then let's say, I'm doing this and I'm like, one of these rhythms is really cool. In this case, let's say like, the first 2 bars are actually pretty cool. Let me just isolate these and let me loop these, right? These would be really cool. We bump up the BPM a little bit. And we're like, okay, let me get to know these a little better. Oops, now I messed myself up clicking the standard. Well, let's pretend it's these 2. Here we go. 2, 3, 4. That's a pretty advanced rhythm, and it's pretty weird to play as singles, actually, because so many of these pieces start on upbeats, which means start on the left hand. So anyways, so that one quick way to use it, thinking about singles, making sure you've got your bases covered there. Another super common way that I would use this, especially with my teaching, is to assign these rhythms to the kick drum underneath a groove. So let's say, let's just pick a rhythm and see what it sounds like, right? So if we look at this, a lot of times I like to encourage my students to try to hear what the groove's going to sound like before they play it. Again, if reading is new to you, that's going to be very hard, but if you spend time, like I said, sort of flashcarding back and forth with this, the melodic chunks will start to be very familiar. In this case, if I look at this, a regular sort of 2 and 4 backbeat groove, don't, cat, don't, oops, don't, cat, don't, cat, do cat, don't, do cat, don't. A lot of kick drums at the end there. But what this would sound like if I played it right, if I wanted to, give myself a little bit more of a guide here, I could go to loop, and I could select the groove thing, so I actually hear it back as a groove, which would sound like, that's going to be very fast. Slow it down a little bit. Here we go. right? Great. And let's say like, oh, all these kicks in a row, that's going to be pretty hard to do. Check it out. You go to custom, and you say select all, and then get rid of the ones that have a bunch of kicks in a row. Triplet kicks, not a lot of fun. We'll leave the rest. You'll still probably end up with a few triple kicks, maybe even a quadruple kick here and there, but it's way less likely. So now I've got all these grooves that will be much more playable on the kick drum. So now if I do this one, don't got don't got don't don't, right? So the second, just by chance, the second one's pulling up that one E and several times in a row. It's going to be great practice. We bump up the tempo on that one. Let's see what it sounds like. See if we can play along. Cool. So another way you could use this, that I hope people do use it, give this to your bass player, right? These are like, they might be a little busy for kick drum stuff, but if you hit your bass player, be like, dude, play some, like, assign notes to this rhythm, and it would be super cool. Right, there's just so much interesting stuff here because we as drummers, right, are oftentimes limited in our rhythmic vocabulary, and it's our whole job to think about rhythms. So, no shade to other instrumentalists, they've got a lot of other things to think about, but a lot of times keyboardists, guitarists, bass players, they're always relying on the same dozen rhythms, right? How many songs are da da ba ga da 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 ga da? Like 50% of songs have that rhythm in it. So just be like, yo, love the chords, keep the chords, let's make something with this kind of rhythm. Anyways, that's one way you can start thinking about this. If you want to hear what it sounds like as a halftime backbeat, just go into the groove thing, put halftime, crank up the tempo, boom, ba-doom, and then we're going to get some crazy stuff here. So what does this sound like? Don't. This one's going to be cool. Wait, watch me change this to quarter notes. Boom. Crank up the tempo a little higher even. There we go. Woo! Anyways, you're going to have to start having too much fun here. Another idea in groove time, in kick drum stuff here, if you select the eighth note grid, which this might seem like, oh, eighth note's easy, but then you crank up the tempo, bada bang, like a 140, what did I do, 145? You'll get a bunch of cool melodies here. Let's do 4 measures because it's going to pass really quickly. If you push the plus or minus button, it adds and subtracts measures, and if you push N, it gives you a new set. So here we've got loop, standard is just going to loop what we've got here. So the tempo is don't cut. Put this back to 2 and 4. Yeah, we're looking good. So what's this going to sound like? Don't cut. Don't go, don't cut. Pick a new one. Don't cut. What's it sound like? Can we play it? Again, if you go up to reading mode, this will replenish itself infinitely for you. So let's try this just as a fun experiment. This might be kind of tough. Here we go. Anyways, you get the point. If you're feeling a little like, wow, like, am I supposed to be able to read these this fast? Keep in mind, I've been reading music for like 15 years, a lot, and put a lot of practice in many years ago. So this might take a lot of time, and that is okay. Let's think about some other ideas, kind of get away from the kick drum freedom stuff. Let's say you're working, well, you could be coming from my website. You could be working on some of the presets. Right, so if you're looping 16th notes, you're looking at the presets. We only need one bar here. Let's say you're working on paradiddle grooves, right? So underneath presets, you've got paradiddles. The first one is the regular paradiddle. The other two are three other permutations of the paradiddle. I call these the 4 paradiddles. I use them on my website for lots of stuff. They're just useful melodies. Again, we're extracting the melodies from all these rudiments. So if I click 1, what you see here is the right-hand melody of the paradiddle. So right, left, right, left, right, left, left. If I isolate or accent the right hand, right, 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 dum, ba, do, da, ga, da, dum, da, da. That's the melody that's going on here. And it's a very useful melody for a lot of different things, right? So first, let's go back to basics here. If we're just getting comfortable with the paradiddle, all right, we get our paradiddle down. And then, again, if you come from my website, there's lots of explaining behind this, but let's say we want to extract the right-hand melody, which would be a useful move as sort of a precursor to improvising on the toms. So then we're going dook, do, dook, do, which is what you end up with it right here. So if I put this back on snare, just to keep it simple, ba, ba, da, ba, 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 da, ba. It's going to be pretty fast. Da, da, da. 3 E and a 4 E and a. Alright, so I've got it. I don't need to play it with me. So. Right, and you could say, okay, I want to make this a groove now. So I've got this on the hi-hat. What's it going to sound like if I put a kick drum with that? And I go, okay, groove. I could even click it and say, hi-hat match the kick, just like I'm doing now, and then I could hear what it's going to sound like. If I add the ghost notes back in that I took out, it's the full thing. Something that I like to do a lot with students as I start introducing them to paradiddles is go ahead and pull up all 4 in a row. So paradiddle 1, paradiddle 2, and then 3 and 4. And let's say like, okay, we're just getting comfortable with these. So let's take 1 and 2 and isolate those and loop between them. Right? So paradiddle 1 we just did. Paradiddle 2, if you look at the right hand pattern here, it sounds like ba, 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 da, ba, 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 da. The pattern is. We might do a little work turning this paradiddle 2 into a groove by adding a backbeat, adding some kick drums. And then a lot of times, like I said, with students, I'll ask them to go between 1 and 2, right, to start mixing the vocabulary together. Right? This is sort of like a precursor to what it feels like to improvise, or to move chunks of melody around. And if I do this, I could say, okay, isolate these 2 things. It's going to loop them. I'll pump the tempo up a touch, and then I can move between them. Here we go. I could take a step further and remove the backbeat and use these as, if I put this right hand pattern, the melody here on the bell, I could start repeating that, get comfortable with it, and then start to use my left hand to accent with those notes or between those notes. It might look something like this. 2, here we go. Put it on snare so there's not so much distraction, and then I can really think about my own ideas over top of it. Another idea you could look at here in the presets. You've got the 16 and what I call, this is 16 invisible rhythms. This is just, it's a permutations of two very common rhythms. And when you permutate them, it just multiplies the utility of the patterns, but they often get overlooked, hence the name. But if I look at number 1, I only need 1 bar here. Number 1 is just this. It's just this very common rhythm, right? I often teach these as useful melodies to start getting comfortable doing like right-hand lead grooves, like this type of thing. Right, so as a way to start developing the necessary vocabulary for that, these are really great. So if I look at this, da, 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 da. So if I play this, I'm going to turn this into a groove. Great, let's go to invisible rhythm number 2. This permutates it over to the right 1/16th note. What's this rhythm? Do cat, 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 cat. If I play the pattern, which you can see written up there on top, B, A, B, B. When you see B, it's left hand, A, it's right hand. In this case, 3 E and 4 E and If I want to check myself as I do this, crank the tempo a little bit, and you can go. Ooh. If you are trying to get comfortable with your groups of 3, which can be very confusing, you pull up the preset groups of 3, dotted eighths. It'll give you the full 3-bar pattern. And I often teach this, when I teach this, I often have people, when they start, isolate individual measures, right? So isolate the first bar, boom, 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 ga-doom, doom, 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 doom. Okay, isolate the second bar, boom, bat, boom, 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 bat, boom, bat, boom, boom, boom. We'll be playing these, if we review some of the things we've done, as singles. You could play them right hand lead. You could play them on the kick drum. 3, 4. Halftime. If you were working on an ostinato, like a samba, you could combine the singles exercise with the samba. For people doing foot ostinatos, this is going to be really, this is an abundance of ideas. I remember when I was thinking about, like, when I was doing a lot of foot ostinatos in college, I look back now and realize how limited I was. I was only doing, like, downbeats, upbeats, groups of 3, groups of 5, and like a couple other patterns, and then just improvising. And this is exactly the problem that I'm now trying to solve, is like, those weren't enough patterns. Right? That wasn't enough practice moving things around. So that's what this is supposed to do. Anyways, you get groups of 5. If you want to go every 5 16th notes, right? This is oftentimes hard to wrap one's head around. Often a very difficult topic, but I hope it becomes a lot easier when you see it written out like this, and you're able to isolate, again, individual measures. If you wanted to play this as a groove, Yep, this all looks good. If you want to play this as a groove, you could hear like what it sounds like first. You can 2, 3, 4, 2, and you're like, okay, already this is a lot. First of all, it's too fast. Second of all, I just need to work on a couple of measures at a time, right? So, okay, measures 1 and 2. Let's get into this. Let's start getting our 5s down. Now, if we switch to triplet mode here, triplets, let's think about some things that we can do here. So one, if you're a jazzer, you can, for example, you could go down into the presets. Again, for the triplets, there's different presets because different things make more sense in triplets. But these are taken from my big 8. But just to pick something that's fairly familiar to everyone, every 4 triplets. Right? So this can be a bit confusing. You're essentially playing a polyrhythm, right? But if you look at this, let's set a tempo that makes sense. Okay, so you can hear the subdivision here. This is going to be really helpful. If I'm working on my jazz ride, let's say. And I'm like, okay, I don't quite understand how this works. Let me play it. I'm going to play along, and I can hear how it's going to line up. Right, you could go back to every 4 here, and then this shifts it through the bar, right? So now it's starting on the second triplet. Same thing. Actually, want to turn the tempo up a touch. Down, down. You could then take a look at doubles, right? So this is still groups of 4, but right, we're talking about every other note here, right? So it's like note, note, rest, rest, note, note, rest, rest, note, note, rest, rest. If we crank the tempo up a little bit here, really get cooking. How high do we want to go? How high can we handle? Right? And then you could get a little clever with this. You can say, okay, like I'm doing it with my snare drum, but maybe I divide these little doubles up in different ways. So first I do gada, gada, and then I go boom, 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 boom. Okay, then I go kaboom, right? So. Ka. And then you have this to play along to. Right, and again, you don't always need the playback, right? Maybe you use it to get yourself oriented. I know what it's supposed to sound like now. The melody's in my head. Now I can practice this on my own. Okay, I think I'm ready to shift it to the right. I'm having a little trouble figuring out where that would land. Ideally, you try to figure it out on your own, but if you can't, you go to doubles and you click number 2, and it shifts it over for you. And then you can hear what it's supposed to sound like here. Okay, I've got it in my head. You could also then go to these patterns called the Afro-Cuban down-ups, which is permutations of the bembe through the grid, just comes up with a lot of great melodies. I pick one at random, number 5. This melody, I only need it once because it doesn't repeat. Sounds like 2, 3, and 4, and Right, so this is in triplets, but it's a very different feel than the sort of jazzy swung thing. So I could make this a home base from which to improvise, right? So I get that going in my right hand. Add some ghost notes maybe, and then I'll start adding some accents. You could take this same bembe permutation and work on it in jazz, actually. Right? If you slow this down, slow it down. What's this going to sound like? Ding, ding, ka ding, ding, ka ding, ding, ka ding. You could turn it into a groove, like we talked about, a halftime triplet groove. For you double bassers out there, what you could do, you could go straight time, 16th note subdivision, kick, why not? Let's go 2 bars, random rhythm, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into complexity, custom, and I'm going to select all of the ones that have a bunch of kick, like triple notes in a row, and this is just going to make you the craziest kick drum patterns you can imagine. And then you can give it to your guitar player and say, okay, go play that. I don't have a double bass pedal set up. You can imagine. Next. You get it. I mean, you know, ad nauseum here, you've just got crazy syncopated rhythms. And I feel like this actually is one of the most salient examples of the utility of the app, because whenever I've worked on double bass, I run out of ideas fast about what patterns to do, right? Obviously you can do da 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 da, and then you know I've started working on like, okay, sort of like 4 notes at a time, da 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 da, 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 that kind of stuff. Then do 5, do 3, and sort of like variations like this. But there's so much melodic content that the exercises cannot include, right? So when you do something like this, you end up with stuff that includes material from the exercises you've been doing, but mixes it with other exercises in a way that just in your mind, there's no system that we can hold in our mind to do all this mixing up. So you have to let something like this do it. And this is what's really the benefit of this. It shows you rhythms that you can play, but that you wouldn't have thought of, with the goal of you getting so familiar with these that you will eventually be able to think of them. That is the summary of why this is hopefully useful. So the double bassers, hopefully you're happy. I mean, you can do the triplet version too. All right, we talked to our metal drummers. Let's talk to our jazz drummers real quick. If we go loop mode, reading, that's infinite new rhythms. Straight time, 8th notes. It's going to be swung 8th notes. We swing up to 100%. And then we've got 4 bars up, and it's just going to generate, 8th note rhythms forever. And we can practice reading those, what is going to be like the swung 8th note, the hits that you'll see in jazz charts. Ba, 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 da, 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 ba, da, ba, So got a bunch of eighth note rhythms, and I could use these as sort of like mock hits at the end of a 4-bar phrase, right? So I play 3 bars at a time, and then I play the first bar. I play 3 bars at a time, and I use the second bar as like hits. So I'm thinking 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3. Look at the first bar. Ba, ticka doom, ba ba. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 2, 3. Ba, ticka boom, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3. And as a slightly more creative, slightly more advanced idea here, you can also just use these as sort of prompts for soloing and creativity. A lot of times, someone just presenting you with a new melody, a new rhythm that you have to follow, is enough to push you somewhere uncomfortable. When you're pushed somewhere uncomfortable, that's often an opportunity to gain some new vocabulary that's missing. So if I just bring up a new rhythm here, and I'm just going to trade with it, I'm gonna play around the rhythm. I don't feel like I need to play it exactly, but I'll kind of use it as a guide, as if I'm sort of soloing over hits, or this is like a recurring theme in the song, and I'm just trying to be creative around it. So what this might sound like is me first. Right, so I'm using the melody that it gives me as a prompt, and I'm trying to select the most important aspects of it, right? A lot of times it's the first and the last note. In this case, that last note, 4E, feels like it really needs to be there pretty much all the time. It's a very defining aspect of this whole melody. So as you do an exercise like that, you'll start to develop, I think, a more keen intuition of like what's necessary and what can be, or in the middle of a solo, what can be sort of glossed over, ignored. You got to identify the spaces where you improvise, when you have space to do things differently, and the things that you really need to maintain in order for it to feel cohesive. So, anyways, this was a lot of ideas. I don't want you to feel overwhelmed at all. I just tried to throw a bunch of stuff at the wall because everyone's in different places. A lot of people are going to, use this app and need this app in very different ways. Right? We've got metal drummers, we've got jazz drummers, and everything in between. But again, more than anything, I am just excited to see what all of you come up with and what creative ways you find to use this. At the core of everything, again, just to reiterate it because I think it's so essential and overlooked in drumming, the meat of this app is its ability to make you extremely literate and proficient generating melodies, right, in your head, right, before they even come to the drum set. That is the root of creative drumming, and that is what's oftentimes secretly, unknowingly missing from people's drumming. Right? A lot of times they think it's technique, it's coordination. I don't have the right rudiments, the right patterns, but more often than not, it's actually that there's not a lot of interesting melodies on the inside. Luckily, that can be brought up to pace pretty quickly, and I'm hoping that this will be some amount of help. So anyways, thanks for watching. If you want to check out a few hundred videos that use some of the things I mentioned in this video, there's a lot of lessons on jpbouvetmusic.com, but no need. This is a standalone app and it's free for everyone to use. If you do, I will encourage this because it doesn't go to me. If you do go to the little hamburger menu in the top and click support RhythmBot, that will go to the programmer Jamie Howard, who's put in tons of time, tons of hours, all the real work in making this happen. And he did it just because he wanted to give it to the drum community. He thought it would be really useful. And I was more of an ideas guy, and we worked on it a little bit together, but he did all the hard work, all the real pushing. So all of that just goes to him to compensate for him for some of his time, if you want. But Either way, it's a free app, and I hope you get some productive use out of it. Happy practicing, and I'll see you soon.